the greatest of all. No one knows whether death may not be the greatest of all blessings for a man. Yet men fear it as if they knew it is the greatest of evils. And surely it is the most blameworthy ignorance to believe that one knows what one does not know. Socrates. So why are we all so afraid of death? There are many reasons, but the main one is that death is totally unknown territory. No one we know has ever come back from the dead to tell us what death is. And even if they did, would we really believe them? So Kirsten, what are some of the fears that you've observed that come up for people when they're diagnosed with a terminal illness?
Yes, thank you, Zangmo. I think one of the reasons that we experience fear around death is the fact that we don't talk about death and dying in our society. And it is very much hidden. So when we are faced with a terminal diagnosis, our first reaction is that of fear. And in my experience, the dying person is worried about loss of independence, loss of mobility, fear of pain, being a burden to others and their family members, and generally not knowing what to expect throughout the dying process. Mm. And this is all related to the fear of the unknown.
And what do you think actually helps to reduce that fear?
I think what really helps in my experience in a hospice setting is giving people education around the process of dying and what that might look like for them. So normalizing the process and explaining the changes the body goes through will help to alleviate that fear. Mm-hmm. For example, fear of pain is very common for people who are facing death. So our job as in palliative care is to explain how we will manage pain, how it can be controlled, and any other symptoms that may come up. So even if there's loss of mobility and loss of appetite, and normalizing all of those symptoms is really important, because then the patient will be at ease with that and knows that this is all normal and this is expected. And then we can put strategies into place to deal with those changes. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to talk openly about death and lessen the fear for someone's journey.
Thank you. So I'm going back to the text. Death is a mystery, and although we have no idea what will happen when we die, we make all kinds of assumptions about it. We assume that once we are dead, we won't be able to go home, that from the moment we die, we will never again sit on our favourite sofa. We think, if I'm dead, I won't be able to watch the next Olympics or discover who the mole is in that new spy series. But we are just guessing. The bottom line is, we simply don't know. And it is the not knowing that terrifies us. As death draws near, many of us find ourselves thinking back over our lives and feeling shame and guilt about what we have and haven't done. Not only do we fear losing everything that we have become attached to in this life and all our references, but we also fear being judged for our shameful actions. Both prospects make the idea of death even more terrible. There is no turning back from death, and there is no escape. It is perhaps the only event in life that we have no choice but to face. We simply cannot avoid it. Even trying to speed up the process by committing suicide doesn't work. Because as humans, however quickly we die, fear doesn't have an off switch. We must still experience the unimaginable fear that accompanies dying, because we cannot transform ourselves into inanimate objects like pebbles to ensure that we feel nothing. Kirsten, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I'd like to add that within the hospice system, and I realize that some deaths are very sudden for people, but within the hospice system, when someone has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, I have found that most people who are diagnosed over time come to a place of acceptance and healing. And this is also the case with their family and loved ones who need to catch up with the process, especially as life will change as a whole for that family as well. So what I really see often is that at the beginning, when someone has been diagnosed with the illness and they have been told that they are going to die, there is fears around it, and there are unanswered questions. And as we go along, as we go along that journey, towards the end, usually the last 2 weeks or 1 week or even more of their life, there is an acceptance and there's peace around that. And the family has come onto the same page as well. So education, I think, is really important to just normalize everything so people can come to that place of acceptance, which I think wouldn't happen if in case of suicide. So I feel that generally, if palliative care is done well, the person will be comfortable and will come to a place of acceptance.
Okay, great, thank you. So Kirsten has spoken about when someone's diagnosed with a terminal illness, but we also know there's a general fear for many around death. It's like a little underlying vibration. I invite you to pause and reflect on your own relationship, concerns around death. How is that for you? And remembering that often our first experience of death makes an imprint, which then influences or colours our perception of death, sometimes even subconsciously. Rinpoche now asks, how then do we rid ourselves of our paralysing, numbing fear of death? And I'm going to hand over to Jakob to continue with this.
Thank you, Zangmo. Thank you, Kirsten, and also thank you, Tsering. Now, we're going to be approaching the Buddhist perspective, and you're all here because you are students of or relying on the authority of Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who's written this. It's important for us to appreciate the value of the Buddhist perspective from a very important angle, and that is, in Buddhism, we actually deal with consciousness. So while we have a remarkable science in the modern world about the material, Buddhist science goes to what we can call the most empirical, the most immediate dimension of our existence, which is not what is out there, the objects, the different things that are material, because they're all essentially based on how we see them. What is, however, universal, that is this consciousness. And we can see pretty much in every culture, beside this, you could say, materialistic oriented culture that we live in. And here with materialistic, I mean the science that predominantly is focused on just the material and doesn't really understand consciousness. In every other culture, the main knowledge is around consciousness, and that is then what is the speciality or the scope of Buddhist wisdom. So if you're here, you presumably understand how the main agent, the main circumstance that needs to be understood is not about just getting, you could say, the right conditions externally in place, which of course are important, but also that we from within have some, you could say, autonomy, agency, and confidence. And so this is the domain of Buddhist studies. And so we're very fortunate. It's not just actually the domain of studies, but it's the domain of the Buddhist science around our existence. And that's why we're here. We're studying presently with the Buddhist master. I think a lot of your friends, they would mainly subscribe to all sorts of other, you could say, more recent research and recent sort of scientific, or you could say the statements that come from so-called experts. But these rarely possess the insight that we have from the Buddhist tradition. So that's why we're here. But it's also important that we are clear on what exactly is the distinguishing feature of what we are looking at in terms of the science, in terms of the value of this. And that's where we should recognize how for 2,500 years, there has been this extraordinary tradition that understands what is it that essentially governs this life, what governs all our experience, and also understanding that in that this is not something that's material. Your consciousness is not generated by unconscious biological and neurobiological systems. It doesn't have that nature, and that our, you could say, present-day science fails to explain this properly. In the Buddhist tradition, we understand that this nature is not something that's constructed on the basis of material, things that exist in terms of time and space, but it's something that is intangible and which is continually giving rise to experience. And that is what continues when we pass away. Now, like Kirsten very aptly sort of identified is the fact that in our society, because this whole domain is not properly understood, we generally don't talk about it. Death is not really spoken about because there's just a lot of speculation around it without actually proper insight. And that's where we then can rely on these traditions. In this case, we're drawing on the Buddhist tradition, but also actually from the Taoist tradition. We're going to look at a quote from Zhuang. And we can take comfort that we actually have, lineage, we have a culture that has an insight into this domain. It's also very, very important when we talk about Buddhism that we don't think of Buddhism as a philosophy. Buddhism is not philosophy. Philosophy is thinking. Philosophy is scholarship. Philosophy is theory. In Buddhism, there's about as much theory as there is when you study cooking. When you study cooking, there's recipes to be learned. If you're becoming a cook, you're going to have to study nutrition. If you're going to be making vegetarian food, you're going to be studying, you could say, nutrition that identifies the value of vegetarian or vegan cuisine. And so, yes, there is some theory, but unless you actually bother to sit down and really look at this theory, then you won't really have the insight into why you are making the particular recipes that you're doing. And so while there is a minimal degree of theory in Buddhism, and that is, of course, essential, the main purpose of what the Buddha taught was to identify where confusion comes from and to address this confusion. And that's where we're looking at something which is beyond birth and death, which is this consciousness. So that's where you could say we can take refuge in knowing that there are persons that actually penetrated to what in our society essentially is a big mystery. So with that in place, we'll now look at how we are actually doing this. And that is where we're working with the mind. Again, to work with the mind is not a rarefied special project. It's to work with that which is with us 24/7, which has been with us from the day we were born and which will continue. So it's not a frivolous, rarefied project to study this particular topic here. It's not reserved for those who are about to die. It's for anybody who is alive. It's for anybody who is conscious. And that's where this is the essential project. We approach this then in terms of ways that we can work with the mind. And again, this is something that we're not normally doing in our world. In our modern world, we're usually given information and then we just stick with that. This is very different from information. This is about us beginning to transform our experience. And today's topic is fear. So the present project, what we're doing now, what we're going to go through in the text, is not about us just reading something and then remembering it or assimilating it or thinking about it. Well, yes, it is about thinking about it, but more than anything, it's supposed to touch us. It has to penetrate to the bottom of our being. And I think I mentioned this also last time. This is what we do in the Buddhist tradition when we talk about contemplation. This present exercise is contemplation from the point of view of something that we think deeply about that then changes us. It's not just that we're going to say, the Buddhists, they have this belief, this, or, okay, I listened to some Buddhist lecture and that's what they believe. That's not the intention with this. This is intended to change us. There's a big difference, between us just hearing, for example, we might say, oh, in Europe, people believe in the metric system. The French people believe that there's 100 centimeters to the meter. Well, that's not really a belief. That's more just the system. Of course, the English, they would have their own particular inches and feet and yards and so on. That's also valid. But there's never a question of this being a belief. The English believe in yards and the French believe in meters. That's just semantics. That's secondary. What is, however, valid is that these are ways in which we handle our reality. So here we have something from the Taoist tradition, from Zhuang. We're going to be looking at Buddhist material, but all of it works in terms of effectively achieving something, not just about a particular belief. So this is very real for us. So that's where the following, you might think, oh, this is very cute. This is an interesting, how Chinese and quaint is that, the following, but it is not. It's profound, and I shall do my best to do justice to the subject matter. So it says, and Rinpoche actually writes, beginning this, he says, how then do we rid ourselves of our paralyzing, numbing fear of death? Rinpoche now is speaking to us in the modern world where we're subjective, we're privy to a lot of different cultural crossroads and so forth. So we are familiar with Taoism. Some of us might be familiar with Zhuang, and we're going to be drawing on different, you could say, sources. And the main point really, and this also shows Rinpoche's greatness, he's not just drawing on the Buddhist tradition, but he's also drawing on the Greek wisdom traditions, quoting Socrates, he's drawing on the Chinese and so forth. So this is where this is intended for us to actually work on fear. So again, please do not, you could say, objectify this, or you could say externalize this as something that's just an interesting Chinese way of seeing things, but it's intended for us. Once I, Zhuang, dreamed that I was a butterfly and was happy as a butterfly. I was conscious that I was quite pleased with myself, but I did not know that I was Zhou. Suddenly I awoke, and there I was, visibly Zhou. I did not know whether it was Zhou dreaming that he was a butterfly, or the butterfly dreaming that it was Zhou. Between Zhou and the butterfly, there must be some distinction. This is called the transformation of things. I'm going to continue here because Rinpoche then brings us to a very important point. This celebrated Chinese philosopher's question is well worth contemplating. When you look at a butterfly, how do you know that you yourself are not just a small part of that butterfly's dream? What makes you think that you are alive right now? How can you be sure that you are living? You can't. All you can do is make an assumption. So we might think, well, there's a butterfly out there, and so what? But actually, if we think of this example here, it is very interesting. There you are dreaming that you are a butterfly, and then there's somebody called Zhu, Zhuang. And from that point of view, Zhuang is external to yourself. It's another person. And there you are dreaming about this person, Zhuang. Then you wake up and then you're Zhuang who has the butterfly as the object. What is more real? From the Buddhist perspective, any perception is real as long as we grasp it as real. That's what we call relative truth. That's where we get stuck on appearances. And that's where our grasping at reality, we need to understand it's flawed. There is actually no such a thing that we can really grasp on as being anything that exists as it appears. But one thing we can grasp onto, and that's where we need to begin with the very core of our existence. That is what we could call the ontological primitive, the most basic thing that can be known. That is, right now we know we are here. We can all take this, our finger, and we can touch this place where this is real, namely ourselves. And so we ask ourselves, are we alive? How is this defined? There's nothing we can grasp about it, and yet it is so vividly there. Nothing can be grasped about it in terms of something we can control. There's nothing that we can know as an external object. Like in the quote from Socrates, there's nothing to be known. There's a very humbling situation of not being able to make a story out of it. But there's an immediate presence of awareness. And that is where we discover we don't need to make stories about the object of that. So that's where the various perceptions we have of ourselves, the various perceptions we have of others, these are all secondary creations. In Buddhism, we call these projections, but we focus on these as being so real. So that's where our fear comes from, all these familiar reference points that we have been addicting ourselves to, that we have made the place of our comfort. All of these, they have no reality. And that's what, in a way, life is always bringing this to us. Things are changing. We try to hold on to something, but things change. The more we are willing to investigate this, the less discomfort we'll have with the fact that things change. Things that we don't want, they do happen. Things that we really want to hold on to, they disappear. And again, please don't take this as some sort of book wisdom. Please don't take this as philosophy. This is, you could say, seriously real. And this is something that we live with all the time. And the more we familiarize ourselves with it, the more we will be at ease with these realities. The fact that we cannot hold on to anything, our whole suffering, all our discomfort, our insecurity comes from trying to hold on to that which we cannot hold on to. So that is where we are continually operating within a realm of assumption. We're operating within a realm that we're just calling things particular names, but that's really just from our perspective. If we look at a table, we're seeing it from our particular perspective, but an ant will see it from a very different perspective. We have labels, but they'll change. These labels change depending what language we are. The objects that we are attached to, they are entirely objects that we are attached to. Others might not be attached to them. So all the time we are creating our own particular assumptions about our reality. So right now we can come back to this only thing really that we have, that we can hold on to, which is this experience of presence, of being alive. And is there anything about that that we can grasp onto? So Rinpoche says, think about it. How can you prove to yourself that you are alive and that you exist? What can you do? One of the standard methods for making sure you're not dreaming is to pinch yourself. These days, some people try to feel more alive by cutting their flesh, even their wrists. So we do this. We do this practice of actually just for a moment, just sit and just actually experience. Just do this sense of, do I really exist? Just have a sense of, is it something that we can pinpoint as an object of knowledge? Is there anything to be known apart from just this naked knowing? We try to pinch ourselves. Yeah? There's definitely a presence. But is it something that we can reduce to language, to words, to anything other than just having this clear presence? So that naked condition gives us insecurity. And that's what is so difficult about our life. And that's why we're always trying to somehow structure things so we're in control, so that we are certain that this insecurity is met with some sort of confirmation. And that's what's so difficult about death. We lose all security about the things that we're normally trying to put in place. So in our life, what we do, like Rinpoche is saying, we might make dramas. The most extreme is that we try to hurt ourselves. Another example is that we smoke. Recently, I was talking with a friend who's a smoker. Of course, I didn't want to say that. As a teenager, I smoked. But you know, actually what that is, it's just like I smoke, therefore I exist. I hurt, therefore I exist. I make a drama and have a terrible time with my friends and family, therefore I exist. This is not glib, cliched ways of sort of defining anything. It's something really we should take with us and see the problems and the dramas that we make. So much are created by a continual insecurity. The reality is none of these phenomena are any more real than the experience of the butterfly dreaming it's Zhuangzu, or Zhuangzu dreaming he's a butterfly. So Rinpoche mentions, and this is very apt, especially nowadays, perversely, strangely, we find people trying to hurt themselves. Less dramatically, he says, others go shopping or get married or provoke a fight with their spouse. There's nothing to stop you from trying all these methods. You can fight and cut and pinch to your heart's content, but nothing you do will prove categorically that you're alive. Nothing will actually provide a foundation of security. Yet along with most other human beings, you continue to fear death. Because that's where these things that we put in place, they're proven to fall apart. Every reference, even the spouse that we hate, even the difficult situation, all of that ceases at the time of death. The familiar falls away. So these attempts, this is what the Buddha calls fixation. So you can fixate on the methods you use to try to prove to yourself that you exist. I hope this is making sense. In some way, this is very radical from the, you could say, way that we ordinarily approach these subjects. Understanding life, as we very often understand it, is about just getting things to work for us. But the thing is, life is not made like that. It doesn't work for us. Nowadays, for example, even mindfulness is made to work for us. In the Buddhist context, mindfulness is not meant to work for us. Mindfulness is meant for us to, you could say, to calibrate our relationship to reality. It's to come back to being present. And this is what we do with Buddhist meditation. It is actually to familiarize ourselves with this fact that we cannot fixate on anything. So while we have some contemplations here, it actually, and this also next time, a few times from now, Isbel will be touching on mindfulness, but I'll also be referring to this a little bit here in this context. So it says you fixate on the methods you use to try to prove yourself that you exist. Yet everything you imagine yourself to be, and everything you feel, see, hear, taste, touch, value, judge, and so on, is imputed, meaning it has been conditioned by your environment, culture, family, and human values. We were brought up. This is really important. It's really important to follow in the footsteps of your tradition. It's really important that you assume responsibility within your society. It's really important that you're reliable. It's really important that you have these and that credentials, that you succeed in a societal context, that you have a house, that you have a bank account, and so forth. All of that. And this is universal, and that's not just, we're not just talking the modern world, but we're talking universally down through the ages. Everywhere, all societies are the same. By conquering these imputations and your conditioning, you can also conquer your fear of death. This is what the Buddhist describes as freeing yourself from dualistic distinctions, which requires very little effort and absolutely no expenditure. Yes, this is what we're doing on the Buddhist path. Exactly this. It's called Dharma. And Dharma, sadly nowadays, comes with an ism, Buddhism. And as such, it's aligned with religion, particularly dogmatic system, doctrine, what have you. And that's fair enough. For the sake of convenience, communication, sure. But it is actually the science, the insight into the reality that we're speaking about here, in which there's nothing that we can actually ultimately grasp onto. And that's a very important science, and it's a very important applied science. It's something that we, like I started off saying, we don't really, in Buddhism, we don't really have what we call, Buddhism is not a philosophy. Buddhism is, if you like, therapy. It's a path. It's the path from confusion into, you could say, awakening. It's a path of healing. It's a course of, healing. It's a reawakening to what was always there. But right now we've got stuck into a place where we essentially try continually to consolidate this sense of existence by all sorts of reference points. And that will create tremendous fear of death. That is why in the Buddhist teaching, there's you could say, a lot of transparency around the issue of death. We speak about death. It's a reality, but it's also a curable situation. This insecurity has come about due to confused and deluded assumptions about reality. And that's what we are awakening from. So there's a very real, you could say, understanding of where this problem comes from, what can be done, and what it leads to. So there's a tremendous benefit of this. So that's where it's not just that we can sort of read this, we can sort of like have some little bon mots, some little sort of slogans that we have, and that's good. We have to actually engage ourselves and be deeply touched. This is where we have contemplation and meditation. So like Rinpoche said, what we're doing here by conquering these imputations and your conditioning, you can also conquer your fear of death. This is what the Buddhists describe as freeing yourself from dualistic distinctions, which requires very little effort and absolutely no expenditure. All you have to do, and this is what we're doing now, is ask yourself, how sure am I right now that I really am here? Just without doing any philosophy, without any thoughts, just look. Let's just sit and look at that. How sure am I right now that I really am here? Can we find anything? This is, by the way, not intended to freak anyone out. This is not meant to be some sort of mind-blowing, the rug gets pulled from under our feet. It's really just a very honest exercise. It's so much about truthfulness. And the good news is that we're essentially just freeing ourselves. We're not doing anything that's particularly mystical. And so that's where it is rather helpful to have a little bit of grip on Buddhist meditation. And what we mean with Buddhist meditation is this is a place where we're not really worried about what arises in the mind. We're not really worried about psychological material. In the Western tradition, which was very much about the material, and at a very late stage, then there's now developed a science around the mind, which is still in its infancy, but there's a lot of emphasis on what the thoughts are, what the memories are, traumas, the body remembers, all these things. So much about psychological occurrence, our whole culture of psychologization, the whole discourse of psychologization. In the Buddhist teaching, practice, what we're doing with meditation, is actually to begin to get out of this circle of what we call concepts. It keeps us back. It holds us back. It's another instrument, just like we try to hold on to our reference points, familiar reference point around us, then similarly also with the thoughts, the ruminations, the memories. We have these as giving us, again, they end up being the same force that consolidates this confusion. And what we're doing with Buddhist meditation is beginning to penetrate this and begin to connect beyond just the self-absorption of our thinking. Nobody says that this is just something that just happens and they go, oh, Satori, No. But it's at the same time something very real. And so this is where we practice meditation on a very undramatic, immediate level of allowing ourselves to be present in this naked condition without, and emphasize here, without doing what we normally do, is distractedly follow after thoughts. Again, we have a similar reflection again, coming back to Chuangzu's dream of the butterfly, or the butterfly's dream of Chuangzu. How sure am I that I really am alive? What are the guarantees, securities? again, this is an invitation into experience. It's about feeling, not thinking, just settling into experience. Rinpoche then says, merely asking these two questions will start poking holes in all your imputed beliefs. What do we mean with imputed beliefs? It means these reference points that we have, that we attribute value to. My life, my family, my reality, my dog. And Rinpoche is very sweet. Rinpoche is always sort of going into sort of very sweet and sort of this playful way of saying, you know, who's gonna win the Olympics, or who was the, you know, the mole in the spy thriller and all of that. But of course, all these reference points that we're sort of constantly bouncing off, and they come from these very insignificant little things to right up to the really big places. But when we begin to touch on that which is nakedly beyond that, we begin to equip ourselves to a much greater experience and a much greater, you could say, strength and much greater ease with regards to reality. And so Rinpoche says, the more holes you poke, the sooner. This is so beautiful. This is Zhuang dreaming of a butterfly. You know, when Zhuang lived, I was just looking it up in Wikipedia. He was living 400 BC. And his life extraordinary, you know, and the culture of the sophisticated culture he came from. This is 400 BC. This is like, you know, 1,000 years before the Vikings even began to sort of bang around with bronze and what have you. Somebody here correct me if I got the Viking data wrong, but you know, this is a very sophisticated culture that's been around for a very long time. Similarly, what we have here coming down from the Buddhist tradition. And so certainly merely from the point of view of this being tried and tested for such a long time, you'd think we'd be willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. So Rinpoche says, the more holes you poke, the sooner you will be able to wriggle free from your conditioning. And by doing so, you will have moved a great deal closer to what Buddhists describe as understanding shunyata. Why do you need to understand shunyata? Because by understanding and realizing shunyata, you will finally conquer not only your numbing fear of death, but also the numbing assumption that you are alive. Shunyata is familiarizing ourselves with reality. We shield ourselves off from reality by our concepts. The path is beginning to connect and be comfortable in reality. Shunyata means openness, the open nature of all reality. It cannot be grasped, so it's referred to from that perspective as emptiness. It possesses all the qualities of awakening. And so we talk about Buddha nature and all the qualities of Buddha nature: compassion, wisdom, strength, and so forth. But all of that is the nature of reality. And so understanding reality is understanding this thing we call shunyata. And that's where we no longer, our existence is no longer depending on our reference points. And that's where we can be at ease with not just death, but also the immediate situation of what happens in our life right now in terms of discomfort, in terms of the unexpected, in terms of what we think of as horrific events or whatever it might be. None of your assumptions about who you are, who you make believe you are, or the labels you attach to yourself is the real you. It's all guesswork. And it is this very guesswork, assumption, make-believe, labeling, and so on, that creates the illusion of samsara. Although the world around you and the beings within it appear, and things appear, don't they? But just because things appear don't mean they're real. A reflection in a mirror appears. all sorts of things appear. Rainbows appear, phenomena appear. But the more we go into any given appearance, we found out that things are beyond their appearance. Sorry. So that's where what we're doing here is encouraging a wholehearted engagement with actually looking. So that's where we go beyond just the labeling. So it's like Rinpoche says, although the world around you and the beings within it appear, none of it exists. Again, please don't be worried what we're saying here. We're just talking about penetrating appearances. We're not saying that anything's going to go away. Your house is not going to disappear. You're not going to disappear. Your family is not going to disappear. None of that. But what we are encouraging is that we actually begin to have a relationship with these phenomena beyond just a naive assumption about their solidity. And that's where we talk about fabricated illusion. He says, Rinpoche says, once you fully accept this truth, not just intellectually, but practically, you will become fearless. And by the way, this is not something that happens obviously through doing a course here over the next 6 months, but it's something that is a lifelong project. We look at the cultures in which this science has been applied, and we can see this is something that men and women, they applied an entire lifetime to, but also as a result, they were the beacons and the guides for their particular societies. Rinpoche says, once you have that, becoming fearless, he says, you will see that life, just as life is an illusion, so is death. Even if you cannot fully realize this view, becoming familiar with it will reduce your fear of death exponentially. And again, I'd also like to bring back to what Kirsten was saying earlier. This is what palliative care is about. Getting beyond the alienation, getting beyond the distancing and the running away from the reality. So however it's done, it's indispensable. Rinpoche says this point is worth repeating. Fear is unreasonable and unnecessary, especially fear of death. And a huge chunk will instantly dissolve once you have truly accepted that all that appears and exists is merely a learned and fabricated illusion. So how do we come to accept that samsara is an illusion? Oh, gosh, there's still more. Oh, gosh, there's a lot here. Sorry, I have a little bit miscalculated time here. Anyway, I think it's okay. We'll manage. And I would also say what we're covering here is very important. So, it takes time. Rinpoche then says, life is an illusion. I hope you'll forgive that we might go a little bit over time. I'm sure that's all right. Life is an illusion. There are a number of methods available to those who are eager to fully realize the illusory nature of life and death. In fact, the sole aim of all the Buddha's teachings is to realize that each and every samsaric phenomena is an illusion. Now, when we say that, it doesn't just mean we all of a sudden have some sort of glazed outlook that everything is an illusion, but it's actually we remove a veil, and that's where we come free, we come alive. That's what we mean with, we're talking about removing a veil that prevents us from seeing, from touching, from engaging. So Rinpoche says, start by listening to as much information as you can about the illusions that are life and death, the subject none of us can hear enough about. That means basically studying this particular science, actually understanding the theory behind the recipes. And don't make the mistake, he says, of thinking that listening and hearing are not authentic Dharma practices, because the opposite is true. This is where, sadly, sometimes there's the idea that Buddhism, Dharma, is meditation, and that there's nothing to be educated about. There's everything to be educated about. And it's on the basis of that education that then we can engage with the actual practice with a sense of knowing what we're doing. Otherwise, it's just like when I sat down and started meditating when I was 17, I would just sit down and I would actually have completely no clue what I was doing, you know? My friends, they would come over and say, you know, how do you meditate? And I was like this. They're like, wow, you're meditating now? Mm-hmm, you know. But actually, there's no idea what we're doing. So that's where hearing and reflecting, listening and hearing. There's a big mistake to think that we don't need to study the Dharma. We need the education. And then we need to think critically about it. That's where we then say, next, contemplate what you have heard and learn more by reading books. No way around it. Not so much that we need to take in information, but we need to actually dismantle already existing beliefs that are so deeply ingrained in us. So what we have in the Buddhist teaching, like you're hearing today, is very much a dismantling, a critique that dismantles, you could say, flawed assumptions about reality. Finally, and most importantly, try to get used to what you have learned. The Tibetan for get used to is meditation. So we need to integrate this understanding through the practice of meditation and also through engaging meditation in everyday life. How? Rinpoche says there are many methods for getting used to the idea that life is like a dream. The simplest and most effective is to ask a few questions. Just ask. There's no need to come up with any answers. Emulate Zhuang. So, like Zhuang, gaze at a butterfly and ask yourself, is this butterfly dreaming me? Am I this butterfly's dream? So this is what we had earlier. Visualize yourself as a butterfly. So right now I'm Jakob, thinking butterfly. We actually encourage to do that. How do I not know that there's a butterfly dreaming I'm Jakob? Pinch yourself, gently or roughly, it's up to you, and ask yourself, who is doing the pinching? Who is feeling the pinch? These are the essential existential questions. And we might have asked them as kids, but then we stopped. We need to have that innocence that goes right to the heart of genuine inquiry into what is real. What is the most real thing? Who is doing the pinching? Who is feeling? Where is that person that feels? It's definitely real, isn't it? It's the body. So am I the body? Not really, I'm more than the body, ain't I? Am I different from the body? No, I feel. Can I find anything that is this one that we're looking for when we say who? Again, this is important, and don't think that this is just something that's interesting and exotic and so forth. This is essential. Just know and watch your thoughts. At this very moment, you must be thinking something. As you think it, just know you're thinking that thought. Try and do that, Right now, you're hearing my voice. You're aware of hearing my voice. Let's say that I say, don't think of a tree. You're thinking of a tree, right? Don't think of green foliage. Don't think of a beach with water. Or think of a beach with water. Image comes up. We know what we're thinking. We cannot say that this is metaphysical or mysterious. We know what is happening in our mind. If Rinpoche says, if you're thinking a bad thought, don't let it lead you to think about another thought, good or bad. Whatever the original bad thought, just watch it. So this is not about us correcting, you could say, our thinking. This is not about us constructing positive narratives. This is not about us in any way doing something with our mind, except just being aware of it. Just being aware. Rinpoche says, if you're thinking a good thought, just watch it. If you're thinking about your car keys, you know that you're thinking about, just know that you're thinking about your car keys. Now Jakob is going overtime. Just know that you're having that thought. What about my next appointment? Will I get will I get the souffle in the oven on time? As you think about the car keys, if you suddenly fancy a cup of tea, just know that you're thinking about a cup of tea. Don't try to finish off the thoughts about the car keys. If you feel overwhelmed by your fear of death, just look at it. Don't think about what you think you should be doing or how you think you should be doing it. This is called awareness. This is not about thoughts. This is not about achieving something. This is about beginning to get to the bottom of what really lies at the base of who we are in terms of our being. It's not about our doing, it's about our being. If our being is in place, our doing will work. If our being is not in place, we have pretty muddled doing. And it is this being that we need to familiarize ourselves with. Everything else is just sort of bouncing back and forth in order to consolidate our unconsciousness around being. So Rinpoche says these few exercises will, at the very least, help you understand that a large part of your outer and inner world is nothing but assumption and projection. It's about getting used to that idea. And also it's about getting used to that idea while we still have the leisure, the luxury to actually reflect like that. Gosh. If you have neither the time nor the inclination to become acquainted with the view that samsara is an illusion, try, while you are still alive and healthy, not to get too attached to your plans, hopes, and expectations. At the very least, prepare yourself for the possibility that nothing will work out. Everything good in your life could, in the blink of an eye, become the exact opposite, and everything you value could suddenly become worthless. Imagine that your best friend moves to the other side of the country. You meet very rarely and over time become emotionally distant from each other. One day he writes something on social media that offends you deeply, and suddenly he is your worst enemy. Life is full of this kind of reality check. This is to be expected. What we normally do is when this happens, we get on the phone and we begin to tell our friends, this has happened and it's a big drama. In fact, it's not. It is just to be expected. Life is full of Rinpoche says, this kind of reality check. There's nothing surprising about this taking place. Becoming aware of how things change is a useful form of mind training. It doesn't mean we become numb, but it means we become less fussy, that we become more open, and that we become more willing to taste the quality of our distant ex-friend turned enemy. That's just the reality of it. Us refusing to acknowledge that is us refusing to connect with reality. So it's nothing about being numb or insensitive. It's about us being willing to embrace life as it is, not as it should be, according to our standards. And so Rinpoche says, letting go of all your attachments to planning, scheduling, and expectation will reduce your fear of death considerably. If you never experience disappointment or failure while you're alive, when you find yourself at death's door, you will be terrified. Of course, by then, it will be too late for you to do anything for yourself. If you're lucky, your friends and family might be willing to take responsibility for gathering the causes and conditions to soothe and encourage you. And if you're very lucky, they won't try to deceive you into believing that you will live forever. The best thing any of us can do for a dying person is not to lie about what is happening to them. This is actually a big one in terms of being with persons that are passing away or in dealing with it ourselves. And this is where we need to, the only way really for us to get over that is to actually experience that. And that's also why we're very fortunate to have with us here in the program people like Kirsten and Zangmo and Julie and so forth, Changchup and others who actually have this experience of dealing with the presence of a dying situation and the honesty around that. So reduce your selfishness. Selfishness and greed cause the most intense kind of fear. We will all be alone once we are dead. But if your habit is constantly to act out your self-obsession in front of an admiring audience, you will find the solitariness of death unbearable. Having become so used to the admiration of sycophants who indulge your every whim, when you find yourself entirely alone, you will be overwhelmed by unimaginable fear. So by reducing selfishness, you can reduce the intensity of your fear. And this, of course, refers to not just admiring sycophants, but also those with whom we develop drama. These dramas that perpetuate the sense of, I exist. And that's where we will lose any audience, anybody that we love or hate at the time. And that's where we will experience aloneness. But experiencing aloneness is also where we become honest. We become open to the world around us. Us becoming used to being alone while we are alive means us being less indulgent, being less laying a trip on others. It begins to be us beginning to be more soft, open, and genuinely appreciating others. All of these are big themes. So here we have them in very few words. And this is what we call pith instruction. Of course, these are big themes, and it's not an assumption that we right away just go, oh yeah, aloneness makes perfect sense. You know, it's a hard one to swallow, but it's true. And it comes with incredible benefit to accept these realities. Reduce your attachment to worldly life. Some people are afraid of death because they are afraid of physical pain, but not everyone dies in pain. Whether you do or not will depend on your karma. And this again, karma is not some mystical force, but it's just in Buddhism, we don't believe that things just come out of the blue, that apples just come out of pumpkin seeds or they come out of nowhere. Everything we experience comes about due to particular causes and conditions. Big theme also. But anyway, the bottom line is that we cannot essentially manipulate the reality as we would like it. As every person's karma is quite different, each person's experience of death will be unique. Some people will not realize they are dying. Others may not even realize that they are dead and have been dead for days or weeks. Death can strike suddenly like a bolt of lightning or agonizingly slowly. And the vast majority of the pain suffered at death is caused by an emotional attachment to life, possessions, friends, family, property, and fretting over unfinished business. Everything that's being said here, as tough as it is really the essential homework that we have to do, not just for death, but also to cope with this life. And that's where we understand that death is no different from this life. We're dying in every situation we enter. So we are continually in what we call a pardo, or intermediate state. Everything is continually changing, And it's for us to essentially embrace this reality and familiarize ourselves with embracing this reality rather than trying to avoid it. That's where the themes we touched on here are very much about the avoidance that normally becomes our primary strategy in life, and because our primary obsession in life, all the little things that we hold on to, or big things that we hold on to. And when we embrace this reality, it doesn't mean we become distant to those that we love. In fact, it means that we become less self-absorbed, less difficult in our dealings with others. So I'm just going to be here. Again, I apologize for going a little bit over time. I hope the administrators of this program won't be too upset with me. And I'll just take if there's any questions. Okay, there's, by the way, very much relevant to what we're talking about here. There's a Tsok, Rain of Blessings. It's still starting at 7 p.m. Is not the meaning being fussy mean not angry with things not as expected? Does that mean I am more engaged, not free when I'm angry? Yes, this means exactly that. So basically us engaged with the basic foundations of samsara is ignorance that constitutes a self. And once we have self, then I like this, I don't like that. And that's where we're never really at ease, never really touching and engaging reality, because it's always reality, what is in it for me? You know, so that's where we're not really meeting our reality full on. I'm more anger easily post-surviving COVID, and I never really get recovered, even as the virus leaves my body. The difference only I can breathe without an oxygen tank. Well, first of all, I'm very happy that you have made it thus far. And of course, presently having a life as we have it, then we will experience these situations, very difficult situations. So that's where right now, as long as we have opportunity, we need to make use of it. How would we know that we are being with the thought versus being distracted? That's where when we practice meditation, we have what we call object of mindfulness, something we come back to. And then when we are distracted, we know that we were actually not thinking of the object of mindfulness. Our attention was wavering. So that's why we have, in the Buddhist tradition, we have objects of mindfulness, the breath, an external object, a Buddha, the Buddha, a deity, or you could say essentially a place where we come back to. They anchor us in non-distraction. And this practice we call shamatha. So that's essential for all the various Buddhist practices. Yeah. So it says here, when some relative is about to die, we fear that we are next. That's right. And in that way, we should actually be very grateful to them. They kind of yank us out of our, you could say, oblivion, our unconsciousness. When I breathe, I get hungry and thirsty. I'm convinced that I'm here. That's right. That's right. So we become very attached to that. It's all seemingly based on unfounded assumptions we make around what we think and perceive through the lens of what we think we've learned, based on even more unfounded assumptions. That's right. So we've been deeply, you could say, conditioned by a culture of unconsciousness. And this is what we want to extract ourselves from. What about different professions as representation of self? We are connected with each other with them. Is it good to reduce this self? Very good idea to reduce this attachment to self. All right, so I hope we cleared some of the questions again. Apologies for running late. I think we will be in time for the practice, the SOC. So is there anything further that needs to be said? Zangmo, Tsering, are we good?
All good, I think, just the dedication.
Okay.
Is there anything else, Tsering? Sorry.
No, nothing else.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just chant a dedication on behalf of everyone. Is that, oh, by the way, hold on, I actually have that. Sorry, Chagdu images. Yeah, coming right up. Just a second. This virtuous accumulation of merit we offer so that all obstacles dissolve, and that at the time of death, each of us may find ease in dying, and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So thank you very much. And please, hope to see you again next Sunday, same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jakob. Thank you, Zangmo. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tsering. Thank you,
Tsering.
Jakob.
Thank you, Zangmo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.